This, right here, is a very young Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born into a family of ancient Tuscan nobility on the island of Corsica on August 15th, 1769.
Napoleon had studied at the Military College of Brienne in Paris for about 5 years until tragedy struck. In 1785, Napoleon's father had died of stomach cancer. As his family had no head anymore, Napoleon had to take up the mantle as the head of the family himself. It should be noted that, before he left, Napoleon gained the rank of second lieutenant of artillery and then eventually returned to Corsica in 1786.
Back home, conflict between two groups had reached Napoleon's attention. These two groups were the Corsican resistance and the French occupation, which had been oppressing the Corsicans. Napoleon decided to take action and sided with his father's former ally, Pasquale Paoli. However, in 1793, Napoleon was accused of being too French by Paoli and his other Corsican allies. Without any support from his own people, Napoleon and his family were essentially forced to flee and went under the name Bonaparte.
In December 1793, Napoleon fought bravely at the Siege of Toulon and was promoted to brigadier general. Not even 2 years later, Napoleon was made Chief of the Army of the Interior, which marked the beginning of his national recognition and fame.
After Napoleon had proved his accomplishments and merit to the French people, he decided that he wanted a wealthy wife who could produce a son. For this, he married Josephine de Buenjarres in March 1796, who he later divorced because she couldn't bear a son in 1809. He later married the daughter of Francis I, Marie-Louise, in 1810.
2 days after his marriage, Napoleon took command of the Italian army against Austria. At the battles of Montenot and Lodi, he defeated Austrian forces with ease, also defeating the Papal States and driving his enemies out of Lombardy.
After a successful campaign in Egypt and more victories against Austria, Napoleon had gained more popularity than ever. In 1804, he was named Emperor of the French. One thing to note is that he had to crown himself for the ceremony, as opposed to the Pope. In 1 year, he was also named the King of Milan.
From 1803 to 1815, France was engaged in the Napoleonic Wars, a series of major conflicts with various alliances of European nations. In 1803, Napoleon recognized that money was needed for any potential wars, so he sold territory in North America, owned by France, to America for $15 million, which is also known as Louisiana Purchase. An important battle of note was the Battle of Austerlitz, where Napoleon achieved arguably his greatest victory yet, as his army defeated both the Austrians and the Russians in that one battle. Due to this victory, the Holy Roman Empire was essentially broken, and Confederation of the Rhine was established.
Napoleon had gained yet another victory for France at the Battle of Wagram, where he defeated the Austrians. Additionally, Napoleon had decided to give his close friends and family nobility and important titles, while also reinstituting the French aristocracy.
Napoleon had encountered a problem in 1810. Russia had left the continental system, which led Napoleon to retaliate with force. In 1812, Napoleon led a full-force attack against Russia in Russian territory. Russia knew of this and had decided to utilize a tactically sound retreat strategy, never actually fighting Napoleon head-on. This made Napoleon's troops go deeper into Russia, which yielded consequences as they were not prepared for such a journey. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he and his troops were rewarded with an almost empty city, as Russia had already evacuated the vast majority of citizens. With his men starving and the Russians not surrendering anytime soon, Napoleon was forced to retreat. The Russians, knowing this, had harassed Napoleon's armies relentlessly, not allowing the French leader to escape Russia without substantial losses. Due to this disastrous campaign, Napoleon had lost roughly 5/6 of his troops.
While the disastrous Russian campaign continued, the French were fighting their own war, known as the Peninsular War. Napoleon's other forces were defeated in multiple battles due to the coercive efforts of Swedish, Prussian, Russian, and Austrian troops. Napoleon's forces could not hold out for long, and in 1814, the enemy forces had taken Paris.
On April 6, 1814, Napoleon had lost almost all power that he once possessed. Abdication of the throne followed, and, because of the Treaty of Fontainebleau, Napoleon was effectively exiled to Elba, a small Mediterranean island near Italy. His wife and son went to Austria, and Napoleon himself was given sovereignty over the small island.
Napoleon, however, refused to stay on the island. In 1815, not even a year after he was exiled, Napoleon escaped Elba and sailed to France with a large group of supporters. In fact, when he returned to Paris, he was gloriously welcomed with crowds of cheering people. The king, Louis XIV, was forced to flee. Shortly after, Napoleon began the 100 Days Campaign.
Of course, there were leaders who disagreed with the rule of Napoleon. Of the countries who opposed this rule, the Austrians, Prussians, British, and Russians were the main forces. Napoleon, anticipating resistance, had planned to strike his enemies one by one until they were all defeated. He successfully invaded Belgium and defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny, bringing success to this campaign. However, at the Battle of Waterloo, the direction of success changed entirely. The French were brutally defeated by a British and Prussian troop coalition, which was a crushing defeat for Napoleon. On June 22nd of 1815, Napoleon, once again, was forced to abdicate the throne.
In October of 1815, Napoleon was forced to be exiled to the island St. Helena, which was located in the South Atlantic Ocean and owned by British forces. There, he died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51.
I actually just want to be like, yo, it's the end.
As to what he died from, but the most likely cause of death was that of his father's, stomach cancer. Interestingly enough, during his time in power, Napoleon often posed for paintings with his hand in his vest, leading to some speculation after his death that he had been plagued by stomach pain for some number of years. 25 years later, Napoleon's body was taken and returned to France to be buried in Les Invalides in Paris, a place where other military leaders of France were placed.